He took a company worth less than $1 billion and helped turn it into a global content machine valued at more than $9 billion. He cannibalized one of the most profitable businesses in pay-per-view to launch a streaming service that nearly everyone told him was a terrible idea, and then watched it climb past 2 million subscribers. He got fired in January of 2020 in a moment that wiped billions off a public company's market cap overnight. And then he came back to architect one of the biggest mergers in the history of sports entertainment. This is George Barrios. Over more than 2 decades, George built a career across Time Warner, HBO, and the New York Times Company, before stepping into the role that most people know him for, Chief Financial Strategy Officer and eventually co-president of WWE. Along with his longtime partner, Michelle Wilson, he helped write a playbook that didn't just change wrestling, it reframed how the entire sports industry thinks about intellectual property, content, and the battle for the fans' time. Today, the two of them run ISO's Capital and sit at the center of the Global Sports Group, the largest sports investment holding company in the world. In this conversation, Adam sits down for George for all of it. The WWE Network gamble, the data infrastructure most organizations only pretend to build, the partnership that survived what George calls the swamp, and his new book, Sometimes Wrong, but Never in Doubt. They get into where that title actually came from, what really separates confidence from arrogance, and why George believes artificial intelligence isn't the next internet, it's something much bigger. I'm Bryce Clinton. This is the Roar Podcast. Welcome to the Roar Podcast. I'm your host, Adam Grossman. With me today is George Barrios. George, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Adam. It's great to be here.
Well, it's great to have you. I mean, you've had a very long and successful career and still are obviously a young guy.
I like the successful part. The long part isn't. I don't like to admit that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're excited to talk about multiple different things. Also, one of the things we'll cover and primarily focus on is you have a new book coming out, which we're very excited to talk about. But we like to start the podcast the way we always like to, which is we want to learn more about you, your not so long, I guess, career, but a very successful career to date. And we'll start from there and then we'll dive into the book in particular.
Thanks. Yeah, and the book covers all of it. And look, I have to admit, it is a long career now. You know, I went from being so proud of being the youngest guy in the room, and now I'm the oldest guy. Actually, I don't even want to be in the room anymore, but I usually am the oldest guy in the room. Yeah, I started, the first, let's say 20 years or so as a kind of general management, financial management, strategic management roles, different levels. And lucky for me, moving up over the years in different industries. So started out at Time Warner and HBO, a lot of cool things there. Then did a stint at Praxair, which I always said was like a kind of business boot camp. I probably learned more about the science of management and leadership and business there than anywhere else, really. Had an interesting time at a New York Times Company, but then, what most people know me for is the time at WWE. So started as a chief financial and strategy officer, kind of back to the, I mentioned finance management, strategy management, general management, and then became co-president after a few years along with Michelle Wilson, and we ran the company. And obviously it's, I'm proud of, my contributions all along the way, but certainly incredibly proud of what we did at WWE. I mean, when we started, the business was worth less than $1 billion. And, when we rejoined the board to architect the merger with UFC, it was valued at over $9 billion. So being part of that, creating the playbook that transformed that business is amazing. And then Michelle and I, we continue to work together. So it's been now an 18-year partnership. We started our own firm, ISO's Capital, in 2020 to advise in sports and media and entertainment and invest. So we've been doing that. And for the last 2 years, we've been working with CVC and their sports assets. And we just closed the formation of the largest sports investment holding company that exists, which is Global Sport Group. And so Michelle and I are board members and investors in Global Sport Group. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun, primarily an operator the last few years, an investor advisor, but I can't ever lose the operating part of it. I love to grow businesses. So
yeah, there's a lot there. And one of the things I do actually think is interesting, and actually we'll definitely get back to it, is the relationship you have with Michelle. Having two really high-powered, successful executives have this long of a relationship and this successful is something we want to explore in more detail, because that's very rare, honestly. And I want to get the table first and give people the context. You mentioned that most people know you from your WWE experience. Obviously, that's a big focus of the book and what you do with the book. So
why don't we drill into that? And I do love the title of the book and how you framed it. So I'll let you say, because I feel I don't know, awkward is the wrong word, but I think it definitely applies to
Yeah.
you.
So, look, it's the first book I've written. And about halfway through, I'm like, I'm never fucking doing this again.
I can empathize having written the
I
book. Yeah,
tell it's a labor of love and hate.
absolutely.
Like
No
you,
question.
you're so proud as you're doing things, and then
Yes.
when you're stuck or you're in the 10th round of editing. But in any event, as you know, you give a lot of thought to what could the title be, and there was a few, but the one that I went with was sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. And people who know me will go, "Oh yeah, arrogant SOB. That sounds just like it." Yeah, but that really wasn't where it came from. It actually was a phrase in a performance review early in my career. And it was a great review, and and I ended up getting promoted. I didn't know my boss had given me the review the night before to read, so I was like, "Yeah, so you're prepared." It was a great idea, by the way. I stole that from him. I've done that throughout my career after that. But anyway, I read it. It's a great review. I'm reading, but the thing that stuck out is he writes in there, and George is sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. And I can't remember the context, but I remember feeling like, "Holy shit, that doesn't sound good." And then he told me, as we do the review, and it's great. And, hey, we're gonna. It was at that point I got promoted to run the first time I ran an entire business. I was about 30 years old for them. And when he gives me, and I said, "But hey, why'd you write that? Like, it doesn't sound good. Are you telling me that I got to tone that down?" He said, "No, not at all." He goes, he goes, "We love the edge, George. So we keep that." He goes, "Yeah, you kind of sand it down a little bit, but we love the edge." He said to me, and again, stuck with me. He said he had gotten the phrase from a book he had read, and it was written by a Harvard surgeon. And the surgeon had written in there, he said that all great surgeons were sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. And the reason is because surgery is incredibly hard. And if you're going to be great at it, you have to have the confidence that you're going to succeed, because if you don't, there is no chance of success. However, and this is what my boss said to me, he goes, the confidence doesn't come from bravado. It comes from doing the work, the preparation. And so he said to me, he goes, "Look, we know why you're confident." He goes, "Because you've done so much work that you know that the idea is going to work. And then you get in there and drive it home, and you don't let the mini failures with a small f, stop you, because you've done the work to validate it." So that's where the title of the book came from. And I would say probably, for me anyway, we're all different. We all pull on different strengths. But for me, that's been a big one, is I will intensely dive into something to really understand it, to see if there's the opportunity to do something big. And then if there is, dive in again to do the plan of what that thing is going to be. What's the North Star and what's the blueprint to get you there? And then go in and, put blinders on and let the critics chirp away on the sidelines while you do it. It actually, I know we get to Michelle. It's one of the things her and I share. Different personalities, but that element of the preparation and the digging in is actually one of the real bonding agents and why the partnership has worked. But WWE, it was an amazing run. Like I said, when we started, the company's worth less than $1 billion. When we were there, Max at around 7 or so, and then we rejoined the board, led the process to architect the merger with UFC, and that valued WWE at over $9 billion. And it was all this, creation of a playbook that was new to sports and that we, brought to the table. And today it's why, CBC wanted to work with us and form GSG together, is because, they value the playbook too, because they saw what it did at WWE. And it really is a focus on, content, the data that subtends that, how to create stars of your athletes, how to take a brand outside of your home market. It really is flipping the prism of how do you think of sports. Is not about just what's on the field, but about a core element of intellectual property and building the business around that. And everybody says they're doing that, and they are to some degree. I would say what we did at WWE was pretty deep. And it's that playbook that we take. When I say playbook, it's not PowerPoint slides. It's about 400 pages of text of what we did, how we created it, kind of the things you've got to deal with as the person building it, like the tensions and so on. So, but yeah, it was a great run.
Well, we want to see that book as well. Once this book comes out, we'll see
That
both.
would be the second book. I actually have started outlining that book.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah.
But we do want to dive into the playbook. One thing I do want to, before we dive into that, the point about confidence versus arrogance, and I think the idea of having confidence I think people can conflate that, but really it is important to have confidence, right? You have to really believe in what you're doing and really have conviction. And that goes into exactly what you were talking about with the WWE, launching the WWE Network, which obviously was foundational to what you're talking about in terms of the transformation of the WWE. One, can you talk about the WWE Network? And two, how did that come to fruition? How did you start thinking about that as a path forward?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, WWE Network in a lot of ways was a tactic. The strategy really came out around of this notion of intellectual property, the belief that, at that point we hadn't started with AI generated content, but certainly with user generated content. So our belief was there's going to be a massive fragmentation of content because there will be a glut of it, which is what transpired. You're going to fragment people's time. So you have to win the battle for time. We became maniacal. I know you're a data guy. We became maniacal about measuring time. And even to this day, people tell me they're doing it. I walk into the office, ask the person running, I go, well, how many hours of content are you creating today? You crickets. What's the total time consumed across all platforms? Crickets. So even to this day, it's still not. We were doing it, now almost 15 years ago. That was a strategy. WWE Network was an SVOD service, right? So for us, we said, look, we're creating 300 hours of in-ring match content. That's what we do at WWE. That's great. What we're going to end up doing over a long, it's going to take us 5 to 10 years. We're going to create another 2,000 to 3,000 hours around that. And it'll be on social, digital, portrait, horizontal. It was that level of detail, content line by content line, what's it going, what's the audience for it, so on and so forth. The SVOD, WWE Network, we said, hey, this is for our most passionate fans. So this is not for every fan of wrestling. It's for our most passionate wrestling fans. And we're going to put content on there. We're going to take an existing distribution method, which was pay-per-view, where your people are paying $50 or $60 a month to access, the prime event of the month, right? Our playoffs, if you will, WWE's playoff. And we're going to get away with that. We're going to make it so the fans only have to pay $10 a month. And we're going to do it there. Now, big change, right? I mean, and we cannibalize an incredibly profitable business. I remember it was one of the satellite guys, DirecTV or Dish, issued a press release saying what a dumb idea was. Now, so you think about this. Huge company, and here we are, the little wrestling people, in Stanford, and there's this huge company. I remember telling Michelle, I go, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, right? And then you win. And I'm like, here we go, right? Yeah. So they've been ignoring us.
I guess.
Now they're throwing darts at us. I go, we're on the right track. But yeah, we did it. Got a lot of criticism for it. Investors didn't like it because they saw the cannibalization of the existing business, but they didn't like it until it worked, and a year later, we had 1 million subscribers. It was profitable, and at its peak, it was over 2 million subscribers, 200 million plus in revenue, about $80 million in profit. So huge transformation. But again, people remember that, and they remember what a big deal it was. And it was. I'm not taking away, it was a big deal. But it really was a tactic. The real strategy was the creation of a content factory, and we're now going to go into multiple places. So, but yeah, it was a lot of fun.
But it's a fundamental change in the business model. And obviously, you had a lot of well-documented clashes, I put it mildly, with Vince McMahon. So one, what was the process like at the beginning when he first hired you, when you were first looking at it? And then two, obviously wrestling was and still is a live events business, or that's a big component of the business. And this is clearly a shift in content. So how do those conversations go to get to the position where you could even launch the network?
Yeah, it's a great question. It gets back to the sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. And I'll tell. Sorry, and I'll say the one thing. You mentioned Vince. There is an element of the book, but he and I worked together for 12 years when I was there running the company. Then a year and change when I rejoined the board. So that's a long time. I would say during all that time, we had one disagreement towards the end, and there was probably one time that I said, that I said something, that wasn't particularly nice, right? Only one time. So we had, from my perspective, a great relationship. I think he would say the same. We were never buddies. There wasn't a lot of chit chat when we, and a million meetings we had. I always say it was, it's like high performing teammates, or, I've never been in the military, but I've got a lot of friends who said, yeah, that, look, you don't like everybody around you, but the people you trust and respect, those are the people you want to have when you're going into, in that case, into battle. And I would say sports team is the same way. And that's the relationship we had. But back to the question. Yeah, look, I joined. I still remember it. Again, tell a story in the book. I get a call from, I think it was Spencer Stewart, a guy I knew. I think it was Spencer Stewart. He was with him. I'm drawing a blank. But he calls me. He's like, hey, I got something. I think it's great. CFO, it's a public company. It's a big deal. First time CFO job in a public company is a big deal. They're hard to get. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. He's like, it's in Stanford. I'm like, oh, that's even better. It saves me the commute to the city. So that's awesome. I'm like, so what is it? And he goes, WWE. And I go, what's that? And he goes, World Wrestling, the wrestling. And I still exact phrase. I go, are you fucking kidding me? You have called me for that? I'm like, so in any event, he goes, well, I remember his quick comeback was, hey, George, you're the guy that's always talking about, you don't give a shit about people's opinions. You want to see the data and you'll make your own. I'm like, yeah. He goes, do you know anything about the business? I go, no. And he goes, so maybe you don't think you follow your own advice? And I was like, yeah, I'll call you later. Hung up, did the work, looked around and said, this is interesting. I'd be lying if I said how interesting I would learn it is. But I was like, this is interesting. Seems like it's a bigger, there's more brand than there is value in the company. All right. So in any event, get in, look, hit it off. First couple of years, we're dealing with the financial crisis. So you're doing shit that is not a lot of fun, which is battening down the hatches, getting through that. But we come out of that and we start thinking, all right, well, what's the growth? So Michelle and I, literally spent 12, 18 months doing the work, the spade work, stuff that people are saying, hey, you're wasting your time. Even Vince is like, do we really need to do that? We're doing kind of deep consumer research all over the world. US, Western Europe, relatively easy. It's intense, but relatively easy. In places like India, Southeast Asia, we really want to understand where the brand is today. So we're doing that work. And at the same time, we're doing this work around, well, where do we think the media industry is going? Where do we think economics are going to flow? There's proliferation of content. What's that going to do? How will, where do we sit in there? And then the big unlock, which now seems like obvious, but when everybody, literally everyone disagreed with, was sports isn't what's valuable. What's valuable is it's live. There's a lot of hours of it because seasons are long. It is tribal. The fan base is passionate. It's multi-generational. People pick it up as, so you start doing that and saying, okay, first principles thinking, it's not that it's a sport, it's that it has those attributes. And holy shit, so does wrestling. Holy shit. So our business model had been an infomercial. We give this content away for free, and then we sell tickets, T-shirts, and toys, which is a great business.
Yeah.
But the unlock of, and by the way, we said that, the media laughed at us. They said, it's wrestling. What do you mean it's the same value as sports? It's not there. It's scripted. The ending is known. That's not a sport. And we're saying it doesn't matter. It's live with a passionate fan base. And we kept saying that, and we kept saying that. And then eventually, the people we had to convince, which were the intermediaries, right? The networks and distribution said, yeah, you're right. God damn it, you're right. And so obviously that means in their case, they've got to pay different economics to us, right? Because we're getting those. Right. So they didn't want us to be right. But eventually when people just saw it, but that was the unlock. The network specifically, right? Because you're saying that really hard. I remember Vince pushing really up. He created the pay-per-view business, right? So telling the guy, not just the intellectual element of why this is going to work, but the emotional element of hey, we're killing the baby here with that. Yeah, it was hard. But, Vince ultimately, and I should say, nothing like what you people think and see on TV, right? The difficulty of working with Vince wasn't that Vince, I think people would assume he's loud. He's not. He's a stoic. The real difficulty is getting him to tell you what he's thinking, right? It's very hard. I'm the opposite, right? I won't stop telling you what I think, right? So totally different personalities in that way. But yeah, that work around the network was just a lot of leg work and spade work and thinking. How does this fit within the entire, our content factory model? Where does an SVOD service fit? And, again, he got comfortable. because he saw the amount of work and thinking and how we were going to do it, as well as how we're going to build this out, the mundane element, what
exactly.
a lot of investors call the blocking and tackling. I'm like, yeah, you obviously never played football, because anybody who's ever played football never says blocking and tackling in kind of like a dismissive way, right? It's like, it's the goddamn, that is the game. So in any event, you're right. So, but he had seen it, he got comfortable, but it was scary. Look, I mean, when we launch and the pay-per-view business goes to zero, and now we're building up a subscriber base. Yeah, man, it was, I'd be lying if I said it was scary. It was a swamp of, I talk about the swamp of despair in the book, the journey you have to go through emotionally when you're doing something big, right? Because the problem is, if it's big, it ain't easy.
Exactly.
And so this is not easy. And if it's big, there will be naysayers, because it's not easy, right? To be big, you're going against the status quo. The status quo is never big. So you got to find, and it's hard. And so we were in the swamp. I remember Michelle, I learned about the swamp during that time. I'm trying to read stuff and say, hey, how do you get through this? And I saw that and I'm like, holy shit, this is what it is. And the swamp is great idea. Holy shit. What did we do? And then you kind of claw your way out, and then you get out and you're like, all right, we should just stop. We got out of that mess. But if you keep going, and if you were right and you keep going, all of a sudden you look back and go, man, this is the greatest thing I've ever done. And so, yeah, her and I were in the swamp. I mean, you talk about the relationship. I would say, well, I think one of the reasons I was able to get through the swamp was because she was there, right, with me, right, and having my back. And at times like that, look, the reality is, people run for the exits, and they start going, oh, that was his idea, not mine, and she never did that. I didn't do that to her. And I think, frankly, that's what built the trust that allowed us to be, for that partnership to work. Because it is hard. People ask me all the time, you brought it up, how, you recommend that, the co-CEO model? I'm like, hell no. It's really hard. If you would have asked me, do I want to be a coach? Hell no, I don't want to be a guy. I want to be CEO. I know what I want to do. I don't want to have, somebody that then I got to, figure out how to make work. But for us, I think, people always assume, because of our backgrounds, oh, you guys fill in each other's, weak spots. Not really. I mean, in some ways you might argue that we amplify our weaknesses. The reason it works is because we think the same way. We approach the problem the same way. We have the same level of intensity and work ethic, which is hard to find. I always say what you want to do is find the Venn diagram, the intersection of intellect, integrity, and energy, right? The people who match you on those things. And we match on those things. I'll have your integrity, not mean that you're not going to cheat. Integrity meaning I'm going to have your back when shit gets tough.
Exactly.
Energy, the willingness to push and never stop. And then the intellect, the competence, like you can do this. And, I always said that's what worked. But yeah, I remember vividly. I talk a lot about some of those meetings that led to that, the dialogue. And as I was as I was writing the book and remembering, some of it you kind of laugh, like, because you were sitting there kind of pointing fingers at each other, getting angry at each other. I still remember Vince at one point, big Vince McMahon, right? He's whatever, he's 6'2", whatever he is, he's a giant, physically intimidating guy. And every once in a while he'd go, George, stop yelling at me. He'd like do it because I get excited. My voice rises. So yeah, no, there's a lot of good stories, a lot of fun.
Well, to dive into the relationship with Michelle, how it started, how it's going. But one of the interesting things about the book, like you talked about, there's the never in doubt, but the swamp of despair, and the balance of those two things and how those all work together and probably work together to build a relationship with Michelle. So let's dive into the relationship with Michelle. How did it get started? You mentioned the co-CEO model. And how has it, when you're in the battle, you're in this swamp of despair, how has that helped to build the relationship, and how have you guys been able to navigate it for so long?
Yeah, and look, it happened. We kind of joined the company, within a few months of each other.
Yeah,
didn't know each other up until then. And so, you start typical, between any colleagues, and, both of us are in the C-suite. So we're part of the senior management team. So it's like, hey, and you're saying, how do you think about the world? Why do you join? You learn about each other's experience. So we were doing that. But the real kind of bonding element at the start was, I told her the same story I told you, but when the recruiter called me. Now, Michelle had worked for Vince earlier in her career with XFL, launched the XFL. So she had worked with him, whatever it was, 8, 9, 10 years prior to then rejoining. So she knew him. And so we talked about that. But, I said to her and she goes, yeah, I agree. It's like this is a really good business. But when you look at it, you look at the intensity of the fandom, you're like, it should be bigger. Why isn't it bigger? And she goes, I agree. And so then it became this, and again, back to the similarity we share is like, all right, let's dig in. We talked about, we need to have a better understanding of our, not this bullshit YouGov data that, is out there. We got to go really deep and understand how our fans think about what we do. We really need to understand, because we don't. The stuff we have is boilerplate, what everybody has, which is fine. It's okay. But if we're looking for nuggets, golden nuggets, things that haven't been pulled out yet, we got to go a lot deeper. So that was part of the work. And, we also said, we also got to have a point of view of how this industry is going to change, right? If 2008, you're still kind of midway through, what's happening in the media industry, the cataclysm hasn't happened yet, right? But we actually had shit in front of the board in 2010, 11 that basically mimics all the stuff we talk about today with the mergers and the networks losing their power in essence. We had that all laid out, and what we were then talking about. So where do we fit in that? And, during that, it was like, okay, we're wrestling back to the pivot wrestling. All right, that's good. But it was during that digging that I said, sounds basic now. Everybody disagreed. It's like, nah, man, what's valuable here isn't sport. It's live. And we're that. And that is how we're going to reposition us. And look, and then, I always tell there was not one action. It was a million little things. Even as, we talk to the portfolio companies, that we're invested in now, we talk about B2B PR. One of the things we did early on, we said, we're going to release people don't get who we are, or actually it's worse. Right. They know who we are and they have their own perception, and we got to pivot that. And our thing was a press release a day. And every time we tell people that, they chuckle. I was like, no, it was a press release a day. And it wasn't just, we're not making shit up. We went to every executive in the company, right, our teams, and said, this is what we're going to do. Every week on Friday, you're going to put 10 things that you think in your area of the business are worth talking about. Now, the truth is, nobody's got 10 things every week, but you're going to give us 10, right? So all of a sudden you got, 100 ideas. And that's now goes into the top of the funnel to what we're doing next week, right? We're doing a press release a day. Was it always 5 a week or 7 a week? No, not always, but it was that type of cadence. And like most things with her and I, it's not just some random stuff. We built a machine, right? A machine, data driven, right? Because we were one of the early investors internally in data and analytics, including to support the PR effort of how is each message getting out there and how is it doing? And then let's continue to amplify the things that work. So in any event, even at something where people go, oh, a press release, that's part of the playbook. And it's not just to do what I just said, you got to build a system, a machine that makes that happen. So in any event, it was that. We bonded over that. As the transition, again, back to the swamp of despair, her and I sit in front of the board in 2010, I think, 10 or 11. And we're like, here it is. Here's what we're going to do in the next 5 years. This is where we think we can take the business. And we're saying, we think we can 10X the business. And everybody's like, well, that's crazy. I don't think even Vince believed it, and he was always the cheerleader about WWE. I don't think he even believed it. And we're like, no, we can do this. And let me explain to you why. We did a whole bunch of work to show how much live consumption, what live hours we're getting in the market, blah, 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 all this stuff, how it impacts sponsorship, have the idea for the SVOD service laid out there. So we put that, out there. We were so excited, right? We're like, man, this is good work. The board agreed, right? We're going. Well, guess what? Now you're going and shit's not working exactly like it got laid out. And now people are, it was painful. And back to the relationship. She never lost faith. I certainly did, because we had done the work and we could see the work working. It just wasn't manifesting into economics, right? Because you're on a renewal cycle with your partners that's 3 or 5 years long. So you got to wait, but we could see it working. Investors, you're public, so everything is out there. They're chirping in saying they're not happy. Analysts are criticizing it, but until it all starts working. And that took about 3 or 4 years. So that journey, we were in the swamp, and some days really deep in the swamp, others just kind of, heads above water getting through it. But ultimately, that's what forged the partnership. That's where the intellect was obvious, right? We could see that each other, we could hang with each other, and there was a steel sharpened steel element to it. The intensity and work ethic was obvious, right? This is what we loved to do, and we both loved it, right? It was a crap. We were passionate about what we did. But that integrity, and I always said there's probably a better word I got to come up with, because integrity sounds like, well, everybody has integrity. It's the trust, really. It's the thing that somebody's going to have your back when it's not easy.
Exactly.
Everybody will have your back when it's easy. When it's not easy, right? When their reputation is on the line, when their financial success is on the line, people, everybody changes when those two things. That's what people care about: their reputation and their financial and their health. So that's not in question here. So that we could get through that and support each other, right? That builds a bond. So I always tell people, I wouldn't ever recommend two people co-say. I wouldn't recommend it, because you need kind of this unique, context, I think, to make it work. Otherwise, I think it's really hard.
You mentioned this earlier, that you had a good relationship with Vince and you mostly got along. You created a lot of success for the company over that time period, but it came in and around 2020. There was a decision point made about particularly around the WWE Network and what Vince was potentially going to do in terms of relaunching the XFL. And then you're kind of back in this fire, right? To see like what's going to happen going forward with your career. Can you talk about that experience? And
Yeah. I mean, look, it ends up with me getting fired in January 2020, right? Yeah. I remember when I told Michelle about the book, she's like, "You're not writing that, are you?" I'm like, "Oh yeah, I'm writing that. It's all in there." I'm like, for better or worse.
Public, right? So
Yeah, and that part, that's what I told her. I go, "Well, Michelle, people know that. They didn't know the story, but they knew that." Yeah. So look, I mean, I remember, I think it was in early 19. Her and I are in a car, in some business trip. I would say it was out international. So it was either Dubai, Shanghai, or Mumbai. It was one of the three. I can't remember which one.
Yeah.
But, it's early 19. We've kind of killed it. The business has done great. The stock has gone through the roof. There's always things you're dealing with. But I mean, maybe it was late 18, early 19. And she turns to me and she goes, "I know we knew it was going to work, but did you really ever think it was going to be this good?" And I'm like, "Well, hold on. I've got that board material. I've got our strategy that we laid out, right? 150 pages of, this is what we're going to do. This is how it's going to get done. This is why we believe it." And I flipped to it. And the front page of that says, we're going to do these 10 things, right? There's thousands of details going on, but there's 10 things, and we're going to, 5 to 10x the company. I go, and there are the things written out. And I showed it to her. And she goes, "Yeah." She goes, "We did know." And I'm like, "Yep, we knew. We wrote it down." So, and she choked up. I choked up. So we're in that, that's where we were. During that time, her and I would talk and was saying, "Hey, look, this co stuff is great, but I want to go do my own thing. I want to lose the co." And she said, "Yeah, me too. I want to go do my own thing too." So we were talking about it. And then you're in the summer of 19. And I remember being in her office. I'm like, "Yeah, I think I'm after the next earnings call or board meeting, I want to go tell Vince that, I'm ready to leave, and, and we'll figure out a plan." And she's like, "Holy shit." She goes, "I was going to tell him the same thing." And I was like, "Oh my God." And so then it's like, holy shit. I go, "Well, should we tell him separately? Should we tell him together? Oh my God, what are we going to do? He's going to lose his mind. Oh my God." We're like in a panic now, even though we kind of knew it was coming, but that it happened separately. So we said, "I think it's best if we go tell him together." So anyway, there we are. It's late July, early August of 19. We go in there and say, "Hey, look, we're going to go do our own thing." And just so happens she was thinking this, blah, blah, blah. He and by the way, let's do a 6-month plan. So we'll tell, we'll publicize it that we're leaving. There'll be a transition. Hey, maybe we even stay on the board to make it look very, like we're here to help. So there's no big thing. It's just company's in a great spot, transition, blah. He gets, emotional. chokes up, there's tears in his eyes. He's like, we can't do this. This thing has been so good. We're in there for 2 hours. And he's like, we got to make it work. We're talking through a bunch of things, and so we come out of that meeting. I still remember she told me afterwards, she goes, I was right, which she was. She goes, we should just stick to what we were going to do. The time is right. Let's leave on. And I'm like, no, Michelle, come on. There's still more to be done here, which there was. And there's more great things to do, which there were. I go, we can figure out a way to make it all work where we all get what we want. So anyway, that's what we tried to do. Spent a couple of months, trying to figure that out. That's when the PowerPoint comes out and you're like, well, maybe if we change this or change that. That whole process caused everybody's heart to harden. All of a sudden it went from this is awesome to, you're trying to do that now. And so it really did. I felt that way. I won't speak for Michelle. I think I can't speak for either one of them, but I think everybody felt that way. And we started kind of interacting with each other differently. Not Michelle and I, but me and Vince and Michelle and Vince. And when the three of us got together, it was stilted. And then there was a period there. Vince had said something to me, and this one time I responded kind of pretty, not happily back. And at that point, I knew I'm out of here, And so we got a earnings call, the first of the year, early on in the year, the following year. I'm going to stay a couple more months, but after that earnings call, when I'm having that same conversation with them, and this time there is no I'm coming. So. Anyway, those 2 months as we're waiting, things just get worse. I mean, it's just, you could just feel it. And so we have a board meeting early, late January, which is, it's a strategy for the next, the operating plan for the following year, the strategy, all that kind of stuff. But it's got a different vibe. I've got a different vibe. I'm a pretty passionate guy and energetic and, can be a little irreverent. All of that's gone, right? I'm just kind of basically going through the motions. So come out of that, Vince said, hey, can you come into the office? And in my office, I go in and he's like, yeah, this isn't working. He goes, so we're ending it. And I go, well, yeah, you're right. It's not working. But this is what I'm thinking. We can announce something after the earnings call. And he's like, no, today. And I said, today? I go, that's not going to go over well. I told him, I go, Vince, he goes, George, he goes, it was cordial. He just goes, look, he goes, how I feel. He goes, when you got to do something, you just got to pull the Band-Aid. I go, yeah, Vince, but it's not going to be good internally. It's not going to be good externally. I'm telling you, I don't think that's a good idea. He's like, no, my mind's made up. I said, all right, well, your mind's made up. It's been good knowing you. Thing got announced. You had the same conversation with Michelle separately, and then they announced it that night. Stock dropped 30-40% overnight in one day when it gets out. I remember Jim Cramer the next day on CNBC was like, I thought Barrios was doing a great job or something like that, but that was it. I still remember, Richard Davis, at that point, we had just brought on, I was on the Make-A-Wish board. It was before I became chairman of the board. And we had just brought in Richard Davis as the CEO. And Richard, world famous CEO, ran US Bank, one of the most famous financial CEOs in the world. So he's, the fact that at one point he was working for me because I was the chair of the board was a little bit of a joke, but he's a great guy. I mean, talking about a servant leader, he's that. But anyway, he calls me. He goes, hey, how are you doing? Because he sees the release too. I'm like, and I told him the story, a little truncated version I just told you. And he goes, look, George, at the end of the day, though, if anybody ever asks you how much you're worth, he goes, by my calculation, I forget what it is, $2.7 billion. It's the amount of the drop in the stock price.
Yeah, right, exactly.
And I was like, yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. I like that. I'll be using that. So it was a nice call. And I got a lot of those. A lot of people who had kind of been along in the journey said, hey, and it was tough because you have this great movie, and I'm a big believer. Life's a movie. It's not a snapshot. You can't fixate on a single event. But yeah, this great movie had a, ending, but it was, and, we went on our way, and, then it allowed me and Michelle to actually decide, you know what? We don't want to do our own thing.
Yeah.
Let's keep doing it together, and that was a whole discussion, which I go through in the book. I almost actually took a different role, doing what I wanted to do. And my wife goes, and we're in the middle of COVID. My wife goes, you can do that if you want, I'll support you, but you're talking about that thing. a lot differently than when you're talking about maybe doing something with Michelle. There you get that fire in your eyes. The other thing sounds like you're kind of convincing yourself. So anyway, we decided to do it. And look, a few months later, and this gets to, people thought there was a like animosity between us. We called Vince up, the summer of 2020, so 5 or 6 months after we left, and said, hey, we'd love to go out to dinner and catch up. Now, Vince is not I'm going to go have dinners and lunch kind of guy.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. Right.
He is I work 18 to 20 hours a day kind of guy, not I go for lunch. And that's what he does. So
yeah.
He immediately goes, I'd really like that. Just like that. And we were like, oh, that's awesome. And so the three of us went to this place in Greenwich called Lascal and, kind of reminisced. Obviously, we're all in the middle of COVID there. WWE was going through a tough time. He was really he goes, if we wouldn't have done what you guys did, Cirque du Soleil. So if you looked at WWE and Cirque du Soleil back when Michelle and I joined, same business. So Cirque du Soleil, once COVID hit, went bankrupt immediately within weeks. Vince is a smart guy. He goes, if we wouldn't have done everything you guys did, same thing would happen. The reality is WWE had one of its, even though they weren't doing events, had one of its most profitable years because the business had gotten so big, and also the content factory was fueling so much of the economics. So in any event, it was great. And then look, I'd be lying if I didn't say when, the prologue, which is available on my website, you can see it, it's a sneak peek on the book and you can read it. I'm visiting my mom in Miami. I'm Cuban, so I love getting down to Miami. I'm visiting my mom in Miami. Phone rings, and it's him. It's Vince. This is now in 2023, and he tells me he wants me to come back. That he's thinking of doing something big. Not sure exactly what it is, but he goes, "I need the A team. Would you come back?" And I said, yeah, sure, Vince, of course, no hesitation. He goes, you think Michelle would come back? And I'm like, well, I don't know, but I think she would. He goes, well, can you ask her? And I was like, yeah, sure. So here's Vince McMahon, a little nervous about making the call to Michelle. He goes, can you ask her? And I was like, yeah. But I'd be lying if I didn't say rejoining the board, because I told the story to my, the colleagues and business partners that I just told you, but people were like, yeah, that's bullshit. He fired you, and that's it. That nobody believed it, what I just said. So when we rejoined the board, well, all of a sudden, that was the ending to the movie. That now the movie, you got to rewrite the ending. So this I remember going back into the building for the first time. People are hugging me, ex-colleagues. WrestleMania the following year, and as we were actually closing the deal with the UFC over that weekend, but you see everybody there, business partners are there, it's like a triumphant return. So, didn't plan it that way, but I'd be lying if I didn't say it was a great coda.
Well, I was gonna say it's a good ending to the movie. You brought it up, and I do want to talk about that. Yeah. What was it like coming back to the board, negotiating the deal with UFC, getting the call from Vince? I mean, it's quite a return. I'm not sure we have the time in this episode to cover what you were doing in between those years and everything with ISO's Capital, but which we're happy to have you back on and talk all about all those things as well. But talk about the return, this triumphant return, this great.
So I would love to be back on and talk about
every day.
And I'd love to come back on and actually talk about what we're doing, because we think it's really cool what we're doing, Global Sport Group. But yeah, Michelle and I had left, had hit a home run right out of the gate, took Bolero public immediately, had a venture. So we were doing great.
Yeah.
Awesome. We're now working on our next thing, which ended up turning into what we're doing now in a kind of roundabout way. But that's what ended up happening. But we paused because I get the call. I'm in Miami. I get the call. I call Michelle, and she's like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, "No." He goes, and she goes, "Well, what did he say?" He said, "Look, he's ready for the next thing." I had always said, after we had reached our level of success in that 18, 19, we had hit the ball at the park. I said, "Hey, Vince, the next big thing is we either acquire somebody," right? And I not to get into the meat of it, but the importance of scale I thought was going to be really important and very valuable, or we, merge with somebody or get acquired, that was an idea. So I think as he is in his head is thinking, hey, look, it's time for me to transition. And, he's thinking of that plan and what he wants to do now with his life. He's 80 at that point, 79, 80. He said, "Hey, George, remember what you used to say about scale?" And, he has his own language around it. It's a little different than mine, but I knew what he meant. And I go, yeah. He goes, "I think that's it." I'm like, so you're ready to kind of entertain that, because it could mean that we're not acquiring. Maybe we decide the best thing is, he goes, yeah, I'm ready for any event. I just want to have WWE, one last big thing. All right, any event. So we rejoin, and I don't think, not all the board members were thrilled we were coming back. But because there was a new board, and there's kind of the dynamic thing, a little bit of like, oh, Vince thinks he's got to bring other people in to do this, but whatever. But it all worked out well. We all got along great, and we did a lot of hard thinking about, well, what is the right model, and we said, in our view, like, there were a lot of good partners, I'm thinking, but the idea of very early on, even before we went through the process where you're getting bids from people, there were a few that we thought made a lot of sense, and UFC was certainly at the top of it. You'd have this combat sports behemoth, basically, the two large, if you want to put us, and people say, well, it's not a sport, whatever, but things that are happening, combat, it's happening in a ring, they're the two behemoths in the world, right? And they're both, roughly the same size. And I'm, again, because of this scale issue, 1 + 1, and I always call bullshit when somebody talks to me about 1 + 1 being 3. I go, no, it's not. This one, because of the scale of eyeballs, I mean, the shorthand is, I thought if you had one eyeball, it was worth X, but if you had 2 eyeballs, it wasn't 2X, it was 2.5X, right? And when you're talking about millions. Yeah, right. So I believe that, and I had a very hard, data-driven point of view on that. So in any event, we did a process, typical strategic process. Yeah, we had multiple bidders. Obviously, everybody was very interested, and we ultimately thought the best deal was the one we picked, and it's been a home run. I mean, it was a great deal when we did it, and the stock, I think, is, I don't, I'm no longer in the stock, but I think the stock's almost doubled since we did it. So it was an amazing deal. So 2 great businesses, the one we built and the one they had built, came together, and 1 + 1 is better than that, is more than 2. So yeah, it was great. But the ego element, I'm a kind of usually the, don't really give a fuck, what people think of me. So stuff kind of flows off my back for the most part. But, I would be lying if I didn't say that being public, that we were back, this great outcome, the kind of the warm welcome I got, going back to the company was great. In fact, when Vince meets us, so since that dinner, we hadn't seen each other face to face. There had been texts from time to time, but it had been 3 years or so since we had seen each other. And so we go back into the building, go up to the, the executive floor in the building. He's there, we're waiting in the alcove, waiting for us as we kind of come off the elevator. And he's like, welcome back, welcome home. And he got a little choked up. We got a little choked up. I think the only reason we didn't break out crying is that was the period where I don't know if you remember, but he had a little pencil thin mustache he had grown, like the Clark Gable look, which for a guy who'd never had facial hair. And I remember when I was like, what the hell is that? But in fact, I thought he was joking me because I had grown my little goatee, and I thought that was him poking fun at me for doing it. But anyway, it was really warm. It was a moment it's kind of frozen in my head.
Yeah. Well, maybe he did it for that reason, so you guys wouldn't start crying. Again, there's a lot of meat on the bone here. We will definitely have you back, talk a bunch of different things, but you mentioned throughout, it's very important to us, is data and data-driven decision-making and understanding the fans. Obviously, that was a through line throughout your career at the WWE. It's been a through line to your career, both since the return and then after you've left. So what does that mean? Like when you say you're looking at the data, what does that mean? What do people not totally understand about fans? What should people be thinking about when thinking about fans?
Well, look, everybody gets the data. It's not like that people don't understand that. They get it. I always say is, are you willing to do the difficult stuff? So I'll give an example. As you know, getting data of how pieces of content are doing on an individual platform is relatively easy to do, right? If you're on YouTube or Facebook or TikTok, you'll get that data. What's much harder, because these are proprietary reporting systems, right? What's much harder is to know how one piece of content that was on multiple platforms, how that content is doing across the board, so that you can not only look at, hey, I got 100 streams or I got 1 million streams or 10 million, whatever, but that, this piece of content, this is how it did overall. This is where it did better relative to other. Having the system in place, right? The guts of the system. I would say it's not the data analysis, it's the data engineering, putting the architecting that so you can do that real time, not ad hoc where you're like, oh, let's look at this, but so that every producer is producing content is seeing that real time. So our athletes, are seeing how theirs are doing, right? And people are now kind of inspired by what's working, what's not working. That infrastructure, we built that from scratch. I would say when I started, there were 0 data engineers and 0 data analysts. When I left, we had small teams of both. But it's doing that. And what you see when you go around is, of course, people are using data, but I always say they dabble in it. They do a little bit, and then it's like, all right, well, it's going to cost this much. It's second order impact a lot of times. So that when you're trying to put the business case together, you have somebody going, well, yeah, but so we'll spend blah, blah on the data. Well, where are we going to get it? And you start saying, well, the better we understand our fans, the better we'll engage them. So media rights or veteran rights, that it'll drive that, but it's not direct. So you have to believe that. Sponsorship, the same thing. It's like you're not selling every eyeball, but when your sponsor pitch shows this deep understanding of your fans, that then you can help your sponsor activate because you understand the fans. So all of that, you have to believe that it's not a direct economic. Like I build the widget, I know I can sell the widget for X. It's not that. And that's the issue with data being really driven through an organization. Michelle and I both believe, and then we saw it work, right? So we have the belief and then we saw what it did. So when we go in, we're very passionate advocates for that investment. And then, what we try to do is bring the CEOs and boards along that's saying, we get it. It looks like a cost center. This is going to be the best investment. 5 years from now, you're going to be looking back and saying, this is the best investment.
And then this goes to our final question, which we ask all our guests in line with the data, is artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
How you think about artificial intelligence, either as an investor, or you mentioned before, one of the things you leaned into early was the disruption in content and content creation and the importance of live. So, hey, what do you think? Artificial intelligence from a data perspective, that the importance of live content?
Yeah, I mean, it's right. It's the biggest thing probably that I'll see in my lifetime. You're younger than me. You might see something bigger afterwards. I probably won't. This is that big. I always say it's not the internet. This is much more like the integrated circuit. It is foundational technology that's going to do it. The internet was connecting a bunch of computers. Yes, it transformed the world. I get it. But there wasn't real core technology there. The integrated circuit there was, right? That changes things. The steam engine, that changes the world.
Yeah.
The integrated circuit changed the world.
Exactly.
It allowed for the internet. And I think that's what we're seeing here. So like everyone, it's absolute foundational. Here's the thing, and I've seen it a million times. Every time new things happen, people dabble, especially the incumbents, right? Because making, in my view, to get the real value of AI, it's not typing shit into chat GPT, or layering agents. It's rethinking the entire business of how the business should operate. That's where startups have big advantages, right? Because they don't have the tech or cultural debt that incumbents do.
Exactly.
So that to me is the you need to have your hair on fire on this. Now, I will say this: sports, which is the asset class or the business I know the best, has a massive moat, right? It is very hard for a startup to do anything that's going to hurt, in our case, La Liga, Ligon, Volleyball World, Equine Network. These are businesses that have, in business term, real moats. But getting back to the question, the challenge, right, that every business will have is to resist the temptation to dabble. So everybody's doing something in AI, everybody, because you'd look like an idiot if you weren't, right? So you're doing, it's what are you really doing? Yeah, okay, everybody's got chatbots on their, that they can access. Okay, great, that's good. You're building knowledge bases, that's good. But if I were the CEO of a company today, I'd be thinking, what does this look like? If I were to rebuild what I'm doing today, from an AI now with this tool available, what would that look like? Not how do I duct tape it on, but what would it look if I really was building something today? And so I would also say, look, it's another thing that Michelle and I bonds us is we don't dabble. Like we do a lot of work to figure out what to do. And then in my words, not hers, we execute violently, right? So we will now, once we decide we're going to, well, then now we're going, and we're going hard and we don't dabble. And that's not for everyone, by the way, but it works for us. But I would say to me, yeah, it's transformational, obvious. The thing is, I think the winners will be the ones that don't dabble, and then the other ones won't win as much. Although, like I mentioned, in our lucky case, what we're involved with, there is a pretty big moat around that, even for something as transformational as AI.
Yeah. And as we talked about, we'll talk about those other things next time.
Yeah.
Yes.
This has been great. I'd love to do it. And I'm really impressed with what you guys are doing. So I would love to be on there.
Appreciate that. And we should get the book title in one more time before we go.
Yeah, sometimes wrong, but never in doubt. GeorgeBarrios.com. Like I mentioned, you can order it as well as read the prologue and see if you think you like it.
George, great to have you on the podcast. We'll have you back on soon. And thanks for your time.
All right. Great.